How's it going?
Hey Nick, how are you?
Doing well.
Haven't talked to you in about I don't know, 56 minutes.
I know I missed you.
Just curious, how have you guys been? How do you feel COVID has changed how businesses operate in the long term?
I was pretty hesitant of remote work in the past, and part of it was because we were changing a lot within the company, and it just didn't seem like the right time. But my worry was always, are people going to be productive? Is communication going to suffer? In fact, I found the opposite to be true. People now feel more connected with their peers than they ever have, which is weird.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, maybe it's because people are so alone, they kind of miss that connection, and maybe that's what makes them realize that they actually need. I don't know. That's kind of really interesting, though. That's really
I
interesting.
mean, I think the two groups of people struggling the most are the people that really want to see other people, and I get that. And then I think clearly busy parents, especially when schools are closed, like they have it the worst.
I know you said you were born and raised in Seattle. Do you mind just kind of paint us a brief picture of your childhood growing up? Like maybe if I was in a classroom with you in middle school or high school, like.
I would say I was a pretty good student. I was not a straight A student. If I liked it, like business classes and stuff, I excelled and got A's. If I didn't, like history, it was a struggle. I was kind of a class clown, so I was out in the hallway a lot. I mean, I was friends with everybody, really. I really got along and appreciated everyone and didn't really, and I always tried to make people laugh and smile. And sometimes I get in trouble as a result, but it's fine.
Nice. I like that. Looking back on your life, the reason I like to kind of paint the audience a picture of your childhood is, looking back, who do you feel like had the biggest impact on you, shaping your life principles that you still carry with you today? And like maybe what are some of those principles?
It's funny. I have to forget all the ones I wrote. At my 40th birthday, I actually wrote them and I posted them on Facebook, and there was a handful of them. But I don't know, I think my mom is probably the biggest influence. She was kind of an entrepreneur. She was a therapist, but I think like I said, kind of back to my childhood, I always felt like I'm no better than anyone else, and I think that we all die and go into the same earth, and I just always felt like you need to treat everybody with respect, no matter who they are. I think the other one is I always felt like life is short, so find your passion, find what you love doing, and really do that to the fullest. And that's hard for a lot of people, and I think so. A lot of people go their whole life, right, and they never know what they were meant to do in their life. And I felt like I was lucky. I kind of figured that out, pretty early. So I like to tell people like optimize for your time, not for money. Right. That's another thing I believe in is like money is an enabler to do other things, but you
Hmm.
should think about how you choose to spend your time and be very disciplined on that. And the other one I think is just really just having ridiculous work ethic. Like I've always worked extremely hard, and early on, I mean, one of the reasons I think OfferUp, didn't die in the early days was just because I would work 24/7. And I think I've always believed that if you want something, you need to develop yourself. You need to focus on it and go get it. And no one's going to give it to you. So I don't know. I think those are some things my mom clearly instilled in me.
No, that's really great. After high school, you went to college. You went to Washington State University. Can you just briefly touch on that experience? Maybe some like why you initially did what you did instead of taking the traditional route like your friends did.
I ended up with an MIS degree out of college. This was like during the .com heyday, and there was a lot of different opportunities. I had a bunch of friends that were making a lot of money, basically with just with their degree and no experience, and working for like consulting companies. That was kind of the hot thing back then. You could travel around, you could learn a lot. And while I interviewed there, I didn't get it in some of those locations. I didn't get an offer from those jobs, and I ended up taking a pretty significant pay cut to work at a startup that was started by some of my fraternity brothers. And at the time, I made $27,000 a year with a college degree. And I'm like, man, I can barely pay rent with this. Like it was so, and most of my friends are making like $45,000 to $50,000 a year. My encouragement to anybody, listening and thinking about job opportunities is, the big companies will always be there. They're always the Microsofts and the Amazon. They're always going to be there. But if you want to really grow and be stretched and understand like what you're really good at, you got to go to a small company.
Hmm.
I'd say the most growth I've had as an individual in my entire career has never been at the big companies. In fact, I've worked at Microsoft and T-Mobile, and respect them as a company, but as an individual, I felt like I grew the least my whole career. And I think in a small company, you're forced to stretch. You don't have much of a there's just too many things to do and not enough people.
Mm.
And that kind of forces you to kind of really understand what you're good at. So, going in, I'm like, man, I'm broke. I could barely eat. But now looking back, I'd say like, that was real world education that school is not going to teach you, and something you were never going to get in a big environment.
Yeah, just curious, like when you initially did take that job and, for that amount of time that you were working at that, working there, did you ever feel like, man, like, okay, my friends are making this much money. Like, did you know that, okay, I'm eating dirt right now, if you will, but later on this will benefit? Or like, did you not know? Like, what was your mindset like?
I don't think I knew. I mean, I just assumed over time, like, hey, maybe this company will really take off and I'll benefit from that. I was just so busy learning and enjoying it that I didn't, I just felt like, hey, this is great. I don't think at the time I was thinking, hey, am I going to do this for 10 years?
Hmm, interesting. So you kind of focus on learning. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you briefly touch on how the opportunity at Microsoft came about? And the reason I'm asking is because just so people understand like how opportunities come about. Sometimes it just kind of it's a coincidence. Sometimes they go out and look for it. So just wanted to hear the different stories about like how did the opportunity
Yeah.
at Microsoft come out?
Yeah. I mean, I would say one thing that I've always, I focused on pretty early in my career was just networking. And I would encourage, it's amazing to me how few people really, I think, do it well. I think a lot of people feel it's a big time commitment to go out and meet a lot of people and make connections. And I really believe in life, it's not so much what you know, it's who you know. And I've always believed in that. And so through a series of friends, I happened to connect with a guy that was running a kind of a contracting agency. I was on unemployment for almost a year. I mean, during the dot-com bubble, it was rough. It was a very, very rough time for me. I'd moved on from a serious relationship I had of like 4 years. I was, had very little money. I was racking up debt. Like it was not a good time. So at the end of the day, to be clear, I needed a job.
I want to get into the your first startup in just a second, but before that, I just wanted two quick tangents. You say you had said that you had got over a serious relationship, and you were kind of in a low point in your life. What are some things that you feel like helped you kind of move on from your relationship and kind of like just move forward?
Yeah, so that was a hard time. Like for me, like when I got out of school, I would say the thing, and it's stuck with me even to this day, is back to what I said about just staying physically active. I was having a hard time. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating well, and eventually, I just said, something's got to change. I need to get healthy. I need to focus on myself. Within probably a week, all of a sudden, I was in a completely different mood. I find a lot of times when I have other friends or people that say, "Oh, I'm stressed," my first response is, "Are you working out? Go work out." And you trust me, you're not going to have a time. You're not going to have a hard time going to bed. Like you're going to be tired at night.
No, I love that. And then the second tangent I wanted to, you mentioned that so few people do it. Networking effectively, networking is important, and it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. Could you, I guess, what tips would you have for somebody in their mid-20s that maybe like are just unfamiliar with, networking? What are some tips on like how to network effectively?
I would say, first of all, you have to acknowledge it's a time commitment. It is like sales. And just find opportunities, find places to meet up with people, through friends, reach out to people on LinkedIn and say, hey, do you mind if I grab coffee? I just want to chat with you about XYZ. And if you can, if there's things you're passionate about, you're like, hey, I want to go build this. You can't underestimate the amount of time it takes to find a great co-founder. Like they can be smart, but a lot of stars have to align for that to happen. And early engineers and developers, like I used to go to events and have a T-shirt that says "Looking for," and I would list all the languages that we needed people to develop on. And I found an engineer that way. One of our first engineers. I was at a tea or at a coffee, and it was a big networking event. And he comes up to me. He's like, "Oh, I know most of those things on your T-shirt." And I go, "You want to have coffee?" And we did. And he spent all summer coding for us in the early days of OfferUp.
Interesting.
So, I think that if you have a passion for something, you know what you want, you should visualize it. I'm a very big believer in visualization. You should write it down, and then you should figure out, what is it going to take to actually go and do it. And I think that's the hard part. But you need people, especially if you're building a company. You cannot do it by yourself. Like there's no way. I just encourage people to get out there, get out of their comfort zone, especially if that's hard for you. You just know that it's probably a requirement to build anything. My learning from anybody that's thinking about doing a company or quitting is I think the hard part for a lot of people is they stand there and they walk to the ledge and then they never jump. And I don't think most people should jump. I think most people should just stay where they are because they may not have the grit or the perseverance to make it happen. But I think if somebody wants to take that leap, they just need to make sure that they're fully committed. You can't jump and not. There's no going back. So I think once you take that leap, you need to be prepared and you need to just keep going and not stop. And part of the reason is it always takes way longer than you think. Always takes way longer. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll go do this, and within a year, I'm going to raise my $2 million Series A, and it's just going to go. And that's never how it is.
You decided to start Deal Springer, which was the first form of OfferUp. Can you share the story of what made you decide to do that?
So the initial idea that came about for OfferUp was a personal pain point I had. I literally had my wife and I bought a good sized house with plans on having kids one day. And I had no income. My wife's like, hey, I'm pregnant. I'm like, this is awesome. And I go into dad mode and I go into this room we had full of stuff. And I'm going to turn into my soon-to-be daughter's nursery. And I'm thinking, kill me. There's got to be a better way. Like, how am I going to sell all this stuff? It'll take me all weekend just to post this online. And I think I just closed the door and I ran away. I'm like, I'll deal with it later. And, so I'm out there interviewing for a job, but I kept going back to that moment in the doorway and saying, man, like, is this a time to maybe rethink local commerce as we know it? And I'm looking at my first smartphone, which was the second gen iPhone. And at the time, by the way, there was no Android phone. I didn't want to be a deadbeat dad, basically. I had a wife that was working. I had a daughter on the way. And I'm like, man, but this idea I just think has so many legs. So I'm kind of interviewing and I'm kind of just sketching. I'm just thinking about, rethinking, I'm drawing kind of who the competition was at the time. I'm looking at companies like Goodwill. I'm looking at value and I'm like, wait, why is value locked up all around us? Like, are we all using the existing desktop solutions? And my conclusion was no, not even close. Like value it's stuck. Like it's stuck in our homes. It's stuck in storage units and retail stores. And so I just kept thinking to myself, like, because of the smartphone, can we take a problem space that's full of friction and we make it as frictionless as possible? And if we can do that, then maybe more people will start to use this and there'll be a new way to kind of reimagine local commerce, as we know it. I think it took 4 or 5 months before I finally was convinced that this was a big opportunity. And ultimately my wife, now she's starting to show, she's like, where's your job? And I said, you need to come home. I need to present something to you. And so, she comes home from work. And I had to pitch her on this idea. I'm like, look, I have an idea. I want to run it by you. It was on the big screen TV, and I'm full on pitching her. I had like 12 slides, and I'm like 7 slides in, and she's like, you have to do this. This is the best idea you've ever had. She's like, I think it's big. And I said, okay, well, you know what you're signing up for because, with your blessing, I'm not going to look for a job. I'm going to go all in and try to go do this. And so luckily she said yes, because had she said no, we wouldn't have been, sitting here today. The first year we didn't have much traction at all. We just had a product. We barely had any money. We'd never paid ourselves anything. And we just scraped by. We just said, okay, let's just try to get a product to market. And we would just work nonstop, like nights, weekends. Like there's a lot of days I didn't shower. That's just kind of what you have to do in the early days to get something going. But one of the things we had really focused on was like, how do we get supply? And so Dill Springer was kind of an early pivot. And it was the general vision was like, how do we unlock value no matter where it is? And so I like to remind people that, I get it if you're on the outside and you think about OfferUp today, like we've been installed almost 100 million times in the US. And most people think about OfferUp as, that's where I buy and sell used goods. But 25% of the items on OfferUp are brand new. And that's a growing segment. We have a lot of stores that are using OfferUp now. We have a lot of car dealerships that are using OfferUp.
I just there's just a personal question that I'm curious about, and that a lot of, some of our audience that I've kind of talked to, you mentioned that, like you may not have even started OfferUp if it wasn't for your wife's blessing. And I was just wondering if you could kind of expand, having some experience now, can you expand on the impact of having a compatible partner and like, maybe what made you realize like she was the one, just on a personal level, just curious.
I think she's always believed in me and been very supportive. Having her support was key. Having someone that believed in me. And the other thing, somebody said this to me early, and I think it stuck with me is you just got to tell them everything you're going through. Like you can't hide it and sugarcoat things. When you start something, you think, oh, 6 months from now, it's going to take off. I'm going to do this. That's never how it happens. It's never a linear path. There was plenty of moments early on where I told her, she's like, well, why aren't you paying yourself? Like, it's ridiculous that, you've been going at this for over a year now. And, we have a daughter now. How long are you going to do this? And I would tell her like, I just need a few more months. I'm still going. And then I'd, sit down and say, hey, do you want me to stop? Right. Like you start to have those conversations. And luckily, we would have them and she would be supportive and like, no, keep going. And again, I was blessed. She said, yeah, because, a lot of times my learning through that is persistence, not quitting. And yeah, you got to have a partner that believes in you and supports you and is there in the ups and downs, because you'll definitely have them in the early days.
Yeah, it's really crazy for me to just think about like, man, like the impact of your partner is so important. Like all she had to do was say, stop. And maybe you would have, you know what I mean? So it's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, going back to the girlfriend I broke up in the early days, I'm so happy I did, because she would have never supported all these things. Like that was probably one of the reasons it didn't end up working.
You mentioned that, obviously the early days of OfferUp were, there was a lot of times where it was just really challenging. You had those difficult conversations with your wife and all that. I'm just curious, like what kept you going, other than your wife believing in you? Like what, I would assume that you would have moments where you have self-doubt and feel like, okay, maybe this is the wrong thing. Maybe I should go do something else. Like what was it that kept you on track?
I'm still building something I'm passionate about. And I think in the early days, like, look, the probability of building a startup that's wildly successful, like rounds to zero. Like I've had people that like, well, what's your math? Like, did you go into this with some calculus? I'm like, that's just ridiculous. Like you would never do it. You would never do it. Like and so I think you got to kind of throw that out the window. And then you have to decide, like, are you passionate about what you're building? Does that drive you? Are you excited by the potential and what it can become? And like, could you do that for a long time, knowing that it might take a long time before it becomes something really meaningful? And that's what kept me going. It was just blind faith that there was a huge opportunity out there. I'd meet with investors and they'd reject me constantly. And it kind of cut both ways. I was I was bummed sometimes I wouldn't get the capital I needed, but at the same time, I'm like, man, this is great. No one sees what I see. And that means they're not funding my competition. Even to this day, there's still plenty of challenges as we get bigger. But I think I wake up every day and I think about long-term, the same vision I had 9 years ago, and say, like, am I excited by that?
I love that. And, I guess on the topic of, passion, well, I think it was a Medium article or some other article that was out there about you. You had been asked a question of why you feel like half the U.S. workforce is unhappy, and you mentioned that you feel like it's because people aren't harnessing their passion. Obviously you were lucky enough to find your passion early on, but I'm just curious, like if somebody's in their mid-20s and maybe they haven't quite found their passion, do you have any advice for like how you can go about finding your passion?
Two things I'd say. One is it's like your job to figure that out, and I think some people hope that they're in an environment or something. They're like, oh, my manager is going to help me with this. Like, unfortunately, at least for me, I just didn't have a lot of great managers that helped me in my career. And maybe that's one of the reasons I tend to be an entrepreneur and want to go out about it on my own. And the other thing I'd say is like, don't be scared, especially early on, to fail and go try things. I think so many people are terrified. Like, oh, I'm going to fail. And oh man, I won't get that next paycheck and I may be unemployed for a few months. Like, who cares? You're not going to die. People don't take risks early in their career. And then they get older like me. They have family and commitments, and then they're stuck. And they say, well, man, I wish I took that risk in my 20s. Because it doesn't get easier as you get older. It definitely gets harder. And get out of your comfort zone and know, like, hey, you may fail. Like I've failed many a times, but it doesn't deter me from continuing to drive forward. And I don't look at failure as failure. I just look at, as that is just simply a learning lesson that I can grow from, and I just keep going. So
I love that. Something I'm just kind of personally curious about is for people like that, let's say have a product idea, or like they're out there, right? But maybe just in the very early stages, and they haven't quite built up. Like they don't have 75 million downloads, like however many downloads OfferUp has. How do you like go about just like building up that user base, or like what do you feel like are some maybe marketing tools or some tips that you'd give that from your experience on getting more people to engage with your product?
Too many people seek perfection and they try to build everything into their V1 and then never ship a product. And then before they know it, it's too late. They ran out of money or whatever, and then they're done. And then the second part is, well, how do you get people to use it? And that was pretty hard. That was the next year of OfferUp, was trying to figure out how to get traction. You would post something on OfferUp. I'd show up to your house the next day, I'd buy it from you. And I never told you I worked at OfferUp. I just wanted you to think that it actually worked. So then I'd bring the stuff back to our office. We had a small office, like 5 guys in there coding, and it looked kind of like a Goodwill. It was just stuff everywhere in the office. And so that's what we did. We kind of faked it a little bit early on, until it worked. I would then take the item that I bought. I'd also post it back on OfferUp because we didn't have any items. We had competitors at the time that were raising a lot more money than we had, that were probably really smart engineers, but not thinking about the business problem maybe the right way. And, they would launch and they would be nationwide from day one. And my team would freak out. I'm like, oh, they raised more money than us. And I'm like, they're going to die. Don't worry about them. I'm like, we're going to focus on this one zip code right here in Seattle. And if we can't get it to work in this, then we're not going to get it to work. And so we just kept hammering and hammering and hammering. And ultimately, we figured out how to get it to work in that zip code. And then we just kept expanding from there. And so we go into each market individually and deploy the exact same playbook that we did here in Seattle. And that was the winning recipe.
By the way, I make like maybe $300 or $400 a month, just like, flipping stuff on OfferUp. So it's pretty cool.
That's good. Because if you would have said you hadn't used it, I would have said, maybe we shouldn't be chatting right now. But
if you were to meet the 25-year-old Nick, what advice would you give him?
It's going to be a lot harder and it's going to take a lot longer than you think. Just keep going. Keep going.
What in your life do you feel has given you the greatest fulfillment?
Probably my family, like my wife and my kids. And then I guess as it relates to work, it's really like, I like watching people grow and develop. I love pushing people outside their comfort zone, letting them know that it's safe to fail. Like, look, I got you. I'm pushing you here. If you fail, you're not going to lose your job.
And, thinking long-term towards the end of your life, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would you want that to be?
Redefining local commerce as we know it. I believe a lot of the things we need are all right around us. In fact, half of my house is probably furnished from OfferUp. In your opinion, what is the most important life skill? I think resilience and being able to take punches in the face and keep going. I think that that's going to go a long way in life, because life is pretty hard at times. You have to be able to kind of persevere through things. What is the best advice someone has ever given you? Just never giving up, never quitting. I can't tell you how many times in my life that I've had things where you're looking into the abyss. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And then sure enough, a door just opens up. Something opens up and you go down a path and you persevere and get through the other side. Wow. I think in the moment, though, it feels pretty detrimental. It feels like, man, I'm going to die. But I think that as long as you have this attitude that, man, it's hard, I get it, step back, take a breath, and just keep walking, I find that life tends to open up doors. And that's, at least for me, that's worked. I love that. And then the last one is, if you were stranded on an island and had access to one meal, what would that meal be? Spam with sous vide. It's good island food. Really? Oh, yeah. If I had to pick one thing, you just survive on that stuff, right? That's good. I love that. Well, thanks for taking the time, Nick. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me today. I've enjoyed the conversation.